Well, when I first started, it's better now, and it actually was better in 2012, to be fair. But when I first started, we had this amazingly talented group of designers. I don't know how many there were, somewhere between 8 and 12 of us. And they just did whatever they wanted. Like, it was one of those weird things where they were talented, they got really good work done, they worked really hard, and you would ask them to work on something, and they would smile and nod, and they would work on something else. Whatever they thought was the most important thing. This is like Matt Cahill and Saleo and Blaise de Persia and all these characters. And I was reliable because I had a job before Facebook. I ran a small design firm. I was like used to having clients and felt like I had a bias towards doing what the client asked for. So when I joined a company, I had a bias towards doing what my boss asked me for. And so I think that it helped get a leg up.
Can I be rude and ask, do you think like a really important thing in terms of scaling from, IC to leader is understanding that internal politics? And do you think you kind of understood it in a way that others didn't?
Maybe a little. I think that it became clear to me that a lot of times for the people who are senior at the company, and I was not senior, what they really wanted was to be able to hand you a problem and then not to hear anything back from you until it was solved. And so I kind of I internalized this early because that's kind of how I felt when I was a boss running my own design firm. And so I just remember with a couple people, I just was like, look, whenever I got handed something, I didn't tell them this. I was just like, okay, I'm just gonna do it and fix it and do it well, and then they're not going to hear back from me. Might be a day, might be a week, might be a month, until the answer or the response is, I took care of that, just so you know. And so I definitely leaned into that for a number of years.
Do you feel you have that today with the people in your team? That sounds like a dream to me as a manager. I don't have that.
No, I don't. But I don't know if I want it. I love my team. I have so much affection for my team, probably more than is healthy. But and part of it is because they're all, particularly my directs, they're all much better at me at something, and I can learn from them. And so I try and create an environment where they can challenge me. I know that sometimes I take up too much air in the room, so I'm always trying to figure out how to delegate more, how to empower them more publicly so that they don't do the wrong thing even if I ask them to do it.
You said about them challenging you. I love Gustav, who's a CPO at Spotify, and he said talk is cheap and so we should do more of it when it comes to product. I thought it was very Swedish of you.
Wait, what? Talk is cheap. No, I understood it. Just wasn't where I thought that quote was going to go.
And so my question to you is, like, bluntly, do you agree with that? Talk is cheap and inspiring that internal debate? Or are you more like my mindset, which is bluntly velocity and get shit done, move fast?
It's a balance. And this will feel like a cop-out maybe to you, but so I do think that as a lead, you need to talk a lot. And I think people underestimate this. It's just weird. We do it at our company. Our business model is ads and marketing. Mm-hmm. If you talk to anybody in that world, they'll tell you it's not just about the message, it's also about the frequency of how often you deliver that message. Mm-hmm. And then internally, we decide we're going to do something different. We make a post internally, and 1 out of 8 employees reads it, and we move on with our lives, and we're surprised when the whole company doesn't move along with us. And so I've tried to really embrace some advice I got early. Who was this from? I forget who it was. It'll come back to me, which was, if you really want to move the team on something, you need to say it until so many times that you literally want to throw up in your mouth if you say it again, and then you need to say it again and again and again and again. And it can be tough because you can feel like you're not being heard, or you can feel like you're being predictable or just annoying. But the truth is, people need to hear things multiple times to fully internalize them. And so I do think from the part of that quote that resonates is, like, I do think you need to talk a lot. Now, I also think you need to be very clear about when you're just going to make a call and when you're not. And there are some times where it's like, no, if I don't make this call, we're going to waste too much time, or I have the right occasionally as a leader to just use my, veto power, so to speak. But then you have to be careful, because if you do that too much, you stifle creativity, you don't create enough space, you cannot hire or retain the most creative and interesting talent. So you have to use that sparingly. But that's like a card to play, and you can play it every once in a while, but you can't play it every day. At least is my experience.
Can I ask, if you were my mentor and I was a product or design kind of IC, and I wanted to make the transition, knowing all you know now, is there anything that you'd advise me in terms of making that transition?
From an IC to a manager or to like a more senior leader?
From an IC to a manager and a product leader.
Honestly, anybody early in their career is probably just to get a range of different experiences. I think it's super important to broaden your skill set, even if you don't, or to even just experiment with different types of work, whether maybe you're still a designer, but you're designing in different types of projects in the ad space, in the consumer space, and the enterprise space, so that you can figure out in a more informed way what your values are, what matters to you, what your aspirations are. Because the most important thing over the long run is that whatever you want to be professionally, that you're clear and honest with yourself about that. And then you need to shape your work to be an overlap between what helps you achieve that, and then if you work at a company, what the company needs of you. And your manager's job is to find that overlap and help you with that, but not everyone's a great manager. And so I think you need to do that proactively. And I think early on in the career, if you want to get into management or become a more senior leader, I think range is valuable even if you want to be a specialist, because I think it helps you make a more informed decision about the stake in the ground you want to place, about what your aspirations are. But you also have to be okay picking that stake up and moving it, because maybe you learn something and it changes. But it's better to move towards a goal that you set and change it later than to float through. And large companies and quickly growing companies like the one I work for will just pull you week to week in the fire of the week. And so if you don't put that stake in the ground, you can really lose a lot of time and then pop your head up and be like, whoa, I don't even know how I spent this last 12 months.
Speaking of putting a stake in the ground and speaking of advice there, I did want to ask, obviously you kind of then became CEO of Instagram. And I think one of my favorite questions to ask is if you could, with all you know now, call up Adam the night before your first day as CEO of Instagram and give yourself some advice on what's to come, what you could or should know, what would that advice have been?
It probably would be more like emotional support. It probably would just be patient. Has it been more emotionally challenging than you thought? The first year was really tough. 3-4 months in, my take was like, I've made a horrible mistake. Just
Why was that? Just too much?
It was a lot. I mean, we lost our we didn't only lose Mike and Kevin, who are amazing product thinkers, and part of the reason I joined Instagram was to work with them. We ended up losing pretty much our whole leadership team a little bit before and a little bit after that. So in my first year, I had to hire a head of design, engineering, product management, data science, research, HR, communications, marketing, and a COO. And so it's just a lot. So there was a period there where I was very alone, and that was what was really hard, because I feel like if you have a really strong staff, and they have trust and they get along and they can challenge each other and they bring different skills, you can kind of take on anything. And if you don't, anything can become a problem. And that trough and that 4 or 5 months in was pretty
Can
tough.
I ask, who did you talk to? Because that is lonely. And CEO-ship is a really lonely endeavor.
Yeah, that was very lonely. Who did I talk to back then? I talked to some friends who are CEOs of other companies.
What did they advise you?
And to focus on things that would pay off longer term. So they're like, look, you can mess things up in the short term, but get your staff into place. Yeah. Aim high, don't compromise, because maybe that'll make the next 3 months worse, but then the next 3 years will be better.
Yeah.
I talked to Will Cathcart a lot, who runs WhatsApp. Yeah. I think he was running the Facebook app at the time, but he's been a good guy to bounce ideas off of for a long time now. Some friends outside of the company who had left the company who knew it, but some people who just totally just...
Was it difficult bringing in a whole new C-suite and making them gel together? This is hard.
Yeah, it's always a challenge. I've been lucky. I have an amazing team. I've made a few mistakes in hiring, but for the vast majority of those hires I made in that first year are still at the company and still in the positions at Instagram. But yeah, you have to kind of pick the people based on their skills, but also based on, does the group end up with the set of skills you need from the group as opposed from each individual? And then you kind of have to also try and build that and pick people for whom they're going to have some chemistry without having them all be alike. And that's an art, not a science. So, it's a work in progress, but I just think it's important to spend time on. I'm always working on figuring out how to increase the rapport and the trust within that senior-most team.
You mentioned Kevin and Mike there. It's a very difficult thing taking over a founder-led company as a kind of new CEO. What are one or two of your biggest lessons, having done it now very successfully with Instagram?
I mean, one is actually some advice that Kevin and Mike gave me later. So Kevin and Mike, they were very supportive, and I'm very grateful to them for a lot of reasons. And I had a drink with them maybe 6 or 9 months in. And I had spent a ton of time that year trying to make sure that the team was in a good place. There was a lot of anxiety with the founders leaving. Are we going to get swallowed by the big company? Are we going to lose our identity? And, I spent a lot of time trying to clarify our identity, to try to, boost morale, team meetings, round tables, Q&As, all this kind of stuff. And Kevin's advice was, look, that's all nice, but really what's going to boost morale more than anything else is just doing really good work and succeeding in the market, and everything else is kind of noise. And I don't think he said it quite that in it's quite such a black and white way, but more or less that was the message. And I think he's right. I still value investing in org leadership and communication a lot. I spend a lot of time on it. I do weekly Q&As with my whole team. But I really do think that over the long run, the thing that's going to get people the most rallied, the most excited, the most motivated, and the most effective is doing good work and being successful. And so I've been trying to balance that and make sure that I don't do too much to focus on the short-term reactionary, and more to focus on how do we really just deliver over years, as opposed to worry about something that someone might be upset about this week.
What's your message to the team when you come in? Is it like, this is a continuation of what we've done before? Is it like, this is a change in how we're doing it and we should be excited? How did you approach that?
I said, I'm going to be a sponge, and I'm going to try and learn as much as I can as quickly as I can, and I'm not going to push for any change for at least a couple months. I ended up breaking my promise in one place, but for the most part kept it, and I think that helped.
Where did you break your promise?
The safety and integrity work, we were running too much of our own stuff and not leveraging the much larger teams at Facebook and in the central teams. I think there were more engineers that worked on safety and integrity at the company at the time than worked at all of Instagram. And so I was like, let's just tap into that. They're dealing with all of this hard stuff. Like,